My name's Pat Smith. I'm the neighbouring MP for Lancaster and Fleetwood, and I serve in Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet. I'm very privileged to serve in Jeremy's shadow cabinet as his shadow minister for voter engagement and youth affairs. And it's my absolute pleasure to be with you today because this event is absolutely about voter engagement. It's what we did in the June general election, about engaging with voters who were disengaged with the political process, giving them a reason to go out and vote, and engaging young people in how we do politics in this country, about giving young people hope. It's a huge privilege to work with young people locally and across the country, frankly, and hear about the issues that concern them. Just yesterday, I was at Lancaster and Morecambe College meeting young people on the NCS programme and hearing about their concerns. Some of them are here with us today, so a big shout out to all the NCS kids who are over there. But really, going forward, we have to focus on winning Morecambe and Lunesdale. Morecambe and Lunesdale deserves an MP who's passionate about this area. Morecambe and Lunesdale deserves a Labour MP, and we deserve a Labour government as this country. And part of the team that's making that happen is the CLP, the Constituency Labour Party Chair, Kay Dickinson. Kay.
Very briefly, because I know not one of you here is here to hear me speak. Well, I just wanted to thank you all for coming. Thank you all very much for coming, and thank you to everyone who's helped out here, especially the owners of the Carlton who have allowed us to use their building. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. Sorry if we've kept you waiting and a bit late. We've had a lot of very good discussions with the Food Bank and local community groups in the Melting Pot and other places this morning. And I want to say thank you to all of them and to the Music Forum and others that have given me their time this morning and helped me to understand what they're doing in the community, how they're empowering the community, how they're supporting people who are up against it, and how they're doing their best to regenerate people's lives as well as regenerate the whole town. Thank you to all of them for everything that they do to bring about a stronger community. And thank you to Kay introducing this morning and the work that she and all others do in the party in Morecambe and Lunesdale so that we can build our strength, build our support. Whenever Theresa May finally decides that relying on the DUP to stay in power is not a great idea, we have another general election, we're ready for it, and we're going to be there doing it. And I also want to say a big thank you to Cat Smith, MP for Lancaster and Fleetwood. Two elections in, she's been elected with a much bigger majority the second time than the first because she's a great MP, because she's so hard-working and articulate and speaks up for the people of that area, as well as a brilliant member of the Shadow Cabinet. I'm very proud that she's part of our team and very proud of the work that she's done in speaking up for voter engagement and for the voice of young people and young women all over the country to make sure they have a voice in our party and around our shadow cabinet table, and we want that same voice to be there around a cabinet table when we have a Labour government in the near future. And thank you to Vicky for the campaign she fought in the general election and the support you gave to Labour in the general election campaign. What we're doing now is a summer tour of campaigning. I'm going to, I think, around 35 or 40 marginal constituencies over the summer recess period. And we're doing that because the general election showed how strong our party is, how much support we've gained, and what message we got over in the general election. But it also showed we have a little bit further to go. And that campaigning work and making sure the party is out there campaigning all day, everywhere, is something that's very important to get that message across. Think back to the start of the general election campaign. Every one of the national media wrote us off. every one of the commentariat who were paid vast amounts of money to think deep thoughts on behalf of all of us, wrote us all off and told us that the idea of an election manifesto that promised to redistribute wealth in the opposite direction which it's going at the moment was something that would be deeply unpopular and would have no popular resonance whatsoever. And the idea of a government that would invest money in the future of all parts of the country was all pie in the sky. Well, we did a number of things. One was thank you to all of you who worked so hard from the moment the election was called to ensure all those people who had never registered or hadn't been registered, or young people who didn't know how to register, got themselves on the electoral register. More than 2 million names were added in the first 2 weeks of the election period. Thank you to all of you for the work you did, the student groups, the groups of unemployed people, the groups of students that did it and made sure that everyone had their chance to vote in the election. That was important. The second was that we looked at the way in which particularly the printed media were treating us, and we looked at ways of communicating. These days, modern technology gives us the chance to bypass those that would mediate and decide what you may know or what you may not know. And so we use social media to the absolute fullest extent in the election campaign, and we're going to carry on using social media as a way of getting into the day-to-day debate, but also getting that fundamental message across. And I thank all of you that took part in it, all those late-night cyber warriors defending our party and defending the ideas that we were putting forward in the election. And the other part of the election campaign was the methods we used. Yes, it's vital, absolutely in an election, to knock on doors and identify how people will vote in an election so that on polling day itself, on the day the vote is actually cast, except for those that vote by post, we knock on the doors ever so politely at 9 in the morning and just remind them politely it's the election day and will they be kind enough to vote. By midday you're slightly less polite. By 4 in the afternoon you're slightly more assertive. By 6 o'clock you're beginning to sound desperate. By 9 o'clock you can be as blunt as you like and tell them to get out there and actually cast their vote if they want a major difference in our society. And in that election campaign we also did public rallies and public meetings and demonstrations all over the country. I did 100 events myself during the election campaign, and on the day before polling day we managed to do 6 rallies in all parts of the country, starting in Glasgow and ending up in my constituency very late that same day. And what I noticed was in every one of those events and rallies we did, they got bigger, they got broader, they got more diverse, and they got more and more people coming along out of interest of the idea that campaign could involve so many people and could excite so many people because of what we were saying. And the game changer, the important point in the whole election campaign was, I believe, the production of our manifesto. Because it was written in 2 weeks, because we didn't have a lot of time to do it, and I pay an enormous tribute to those that wrote it and put so much effort into it. Because that manifesto promised what we want to do, which is to challenge the idea that austerity is somehow or other an economic necessity, that the banking crisis of 2008 to 9 has to be paid for by freezing public sector workers' pay, by cutting council expenditure, by freezing NHS expenditure, by creating more and more poverty, by freezing wages in the private sector, and by reducing investment all across the country. Money was found to bail out the banks and make sure they were okay, and then the whole austerity kicked in from 2010. The Tories and the Lib Dems got together to slash public expenditure, slash investment, and reduce the life chances and opportunities of so many people, disproportionately hitting the poorest areas of the country, disproportionately hitting the poorest people of this country. The fact there are so many homeless on our streets is not an accident. It's not an accident of theirs. It's a design because there is not enough investment going into new, affordable council housing for people all across the country. It's an effect of the cuts in the benefit system. It's an effect of the brutality of what austerity has done to so many people's lives in this country. Why is it that so many people in work still have to access food banks in order to get enough to eat? It's not right, it's not necessary. There's something tells me it is simply morally wrong that in a society so rich, we have so many that need to use a food bank in order just to survive from one week to the other. These things can, and I believe will be changed by what we can do as a party. And so, in that election campaign, we worked as hard as we possibly could. And all those that were licking their lips at the idea that somehow or other they were going to see some dramatic return of a Tory government had a total shock coming to them. The Labour vote went up by 3 million over 2015, the biggest increase in support for the Labour Party any election since the end of the Second World War. That says something about the work you all did to bring that result about. And I think we can be proud of what we achieved there. But my sadness is this, that we didn't quite get over the line. A number of constituencies we didn't quite gain, such as here in Morecambe, such as Pendle, such as Hastings, such as Afon, a number we didn't quite gain across the whole country. No reflection on the candidate, no reflection on the effort put in by the local party. And so we have now to challenge this government in Parliament. They don't have a majority, they lost seats. They rely on the DUP. They rely on the DUP to sustain themselves. And the first example of what that reliance means happened a few days into the new Parliament. We put an amendment to the Queen's speech, quite a simple amendment, which I would have thought, given the crocodile tears that every Tory MP had shed for weeks on end in support of every public sector worker, every emergency worker, and no doubt every hospital they visited during the election campaign, they had a chance to lift the public sector pay cap. Not complicated, just saying that public sector workers have a right to negotiate reasonable pay terms and conditions through their unions with the employers, rather than government intervening and putting a 1% ceiling on pay increases, in reality a pay cut. They voted that down. The opposition parties voted with us, except the DUP, who voted with the Tories. Make sure that all those that voted Tory in the election or in Northern Ireland and voted for DUP, just remember who continued the wage freeze for doctors, nurses, paramedics, firefighters, ambulance workers, social workers, every other group in the public sector. Just remember how they voted on that. And we challenged them on the economic strategy they're following. We put forward the idea of a national investment bank in the election campaign, which would be part funded by borrowing and part funded by direct government intervention, and it would be regionally based in all parts of the country, so there would be a northwest basis for the National Investment Bank that could ensure there was fairness of investment across the whole of the UK. We got a lot of lectures about the Northern Powerhouse before June the 8th, and straight after June the 8th we saw the effects of the Northern Powerhouse with the cancellation of most of the railway electrification programmes all across the north of England. Well, that says it all about the Tories. A Labour government would properly devolve that responsibility to regional investment banks to make sure that proper transport infrastructure investment went ahead all across all regions of the country, and it wasn't just on the basis of which region, usually London and the South East, can lobby the hardest to get the most. That has to be the right thing to do. But also on transport, it is railways, of course, it is roads, of course, but crucially, it's also bus services. 3 times as many bus journeys are made every year as there are made by rail, and across the country, it's largely a deregulated bus service, often inadequate, often not available in the evenings, and for many rural areas, non-existent at all, just a distant memory for many. CAT is leading on our bus strategy, of how we use the bus legislation that's there now, how we as a Labour government intervene to ensure there is decent public transport available for all in all parts of the country, so that economic development can be fairly spread across the whole country, not just in areas that have been lucky enough to get central government investment in the first place. So I thank Kat for the work she's doing on that and look forward to the policies we're developing. We're looking at policy development in so many other areas. And so what I'm doing is inviting constituency Labour parties to set up local policy groups that involve people throughout the local community. Local small businesses, local authority, of course, health, all the aspects of the health service, but also all aspects of the voluntary sector. What you would want to do in Morecambe with a Labour government, what you want to do with a Labour government supporting a local authority rather than underfunding it, what you want to do with a Labour government prepared to intervene in the economy and intervene to support the creativity and new jobs. Those things are important. And by involving people in the policy making at the very beginning, we have a much stronger support for what we're trying to do and a much greater chance of getting it carried through when we're in government with all the pressures we're going to face. And I urge you all to think about that in your campaigning work, because there are key areas we have to look at. I've talked about economy. We've also got to look at the issue of wage levels, bringing in of a real living wage of £10 an hour, because this country is unique in having a high level of employment and a low level of wages and a high level of in-work poverty in our society. It can't be right that people that go out to work very hard, earn so little that they have to access a food bank or in-work benefits just to survive, or a bit of both. It can't be right. There has to be a change in that area. And so we're going to be challenged. We're going to be challenged because we've said that we would fund the improvements in the NHS, and I'll come to those in a second, as we would fund a National Investment Bank and education through increases in corporate taxation and the tax bill for the very richest in our society. 95% of the people would see no change in their tax requirements, 5% would, and the biggest corporations would be expected to pay a little bit more. I think it's something we should do, because I think it is appalling that the general narrative given in Western economies at the moment is to every young person and the younger generation, sorry, you're growing up at this time, sorry, you're not going to get free education, sorry, you might not get free healthcare in the future, sorry, your pension is under threat for the future, you better make your own individualistic preparations for the future. Surely what we're about as a movement and a party is about the collective good of a community coming together. That's why that Labour government of 1945, with all the problems it faced, brought in a national health service, healthcare free at the point of use as a human right. They did it because they believed it. They did it because it was in the principles of what our movement is about. And it will be the Labour Party and the Labour government that will strengthen our NHS, end the dicing up, slicing up and carving up of the NHS through private sector provision, through privatisation and through the cuts and closures that are threatened at the present time. Will it cost? Yes. Is it worth it? Absolutely. Yes. Because it does bring about a better health service. And I'm also concerned that we have to look at the crisis in the NHS, in part created by the crisis in the social care system. The lack of provision. There's around 1 million people at any one time waiting to get the social care they support, need and deserve. We have to make sure they get it. Likewise, we have to make sure there is real parity of esteem between mental health services and physical health services, and the mental health crisis is addressed in the way it has to be addressed. And I'm determined to achieve that. So, could I say this about education? Education is the one chance young people get in their lives. And too much of it is increasingly relying on a postcode lottery. A postcode lottery of where you're born, a postcode lottery of your parental wealth, and a postcode lottery of what happened to local government expenditure or expenditure on public services in your region. There's not been anything very fair about the last 7 years. Not fair on the general policy of austerity, but not fair on the singling out of the poorest areas, usually represented by Labour councils, to receive the biggest cut in central government support. You could overlay poverty with a map of cuts and one would obliterate the other. But the reality is the cut would still be there and the poverty would still be there. And so we're determined that we would properly fund preschool opportunities, nurseries and social provision for very small children to come together for at least 30 hours a week provision. Then, in primary school, we'd fund the schools fairly and properly so no child was going to oversized or supersized classes, and that every child in every primary school would get a free school meal every day, eaten together, as an example of what we want them to achieve in life. And I talk to many teachers about their frustrations, about the rigidity of the curriculum they are asked to teach and the pressures that are put upon them, and the way it often stifles the imagination and creativity of so many of our children. So I'm very proud of the short section in our manifesto which pledges a pupil arts premium so that every child can learn a musical instrument during their school period. Not expensive in the national sense, but I think a very important message. And the most expensive area of our offer is on college and adult and university education. College fees have been introduced, the EMA has been cancelled, adult education fees have been introduced, and university fees are now at least $9,000 a year, and if this government has its way, they'd go even higher. I believe that education should be a right, not a privilege. I don't believe that going to university should put you or your family in very deep debt. I come from a generation that essentially had free university education if we chose to take it up, or could get into a university to do it. I don't think it's my place to take it away from future generations. Will it cost a lot? Yes, of course it will. But I see it this way. You invest in the education of all, you gain. The individual gains because they have a qualification, because they have an education, they have a skill, they have experience gained in college with a good apprenticeship or the qualifications that come from it, or a university and a degree education that comes from that. We all benefit because we get that skilled contribution to our society, that skilled engineer, that skilled electrician, that skilled lawyer, that skilled architect. We get all of that as a result of it. Other countries, and it's not seen as particularly radical anywhere in Scandinavia or much of Europe, that you would fund university education. I want us to do the same, that all of our young people have the same chance in life, not dependent on parental income or the ability to sustain an enormous debt, which often goes on for a very long time in their lives. And so we campaign on all of these issues since the general election and all the way through, because our party was built by people knocking on doors, by people bringing communities together, by the work that trade unions did in representing people at the workplace and the need for trade unions to have a political voice. That's what makes us different, and that's what makes us special. And that's where our overall economic plans come from. Our desire, demand and intention of bringing the railway services into public ownership, the water services and the postal services, because I believe they are natural monopolies that ought to be publicly owned, and that we have a government that's prepared to invest in housing in order to create the necessary good quality housing for everybody across the piece, and in particular building of council housing with lifetime socially rented rent models to ensure that the insecurity of the private rented sector isn't something that dominates government policy. I'm determined that we will achieve that in the future. Now, we do this because we're a party in which the democracy of our party has come through and those policies have been put forward. As I said at the beginning, all of you have unique experiences and ideas and knowledge that should be brought as part of it. So please do think about how a Labour government would affect what goes on here in Morecambe, how you would improve the artistic opportunities in Morecambe. It seems a bit sad that the city that produced Eric Morecambe doesn't have as many theatres as it did in the days when he grew up here. Perhaps we could change that around in the future. And in our campaigning, we also recognise our responsibilities to communities as a whole. Since Brexit and since the awful events that happened in Manchester, in London and in Finsbury Park, and yesterday another disaster happened in Barcelona, there's a danger that that turns into Islamophobia, turns into anti-Semitism, turns into racism of some horrible forms. And yesterday I was talking to a group of women in a mosque in Pendle about their experiences, as indeed I talk to people in my own constituency about all of this. We have a responsibility, as they did in Manchester after what happened there, to bring people and communities together. We don't blame entire communities, we don't blame faiths, we don't blame groups as a whole. We blame criminals for causing criminal acts and we protect ourselves against them. But above all, we strengthen the sense of community, unity and coming together in the face of a common threat. We don't divide ourselves up as a result of it. And I've made that very, very clear on behalf of our party. Our campaign this summer is over all parts of the country. I thought a great place to start the summer campaign was straight after the election to go to Hastings. We understand a lot of stuff happened there in 1066 and things developed ever since then. So I thought it was time to go to Hastings, which unfortunately we narrowly didn't quite win in the general election. We lost it by a few hundred votes. And we had more than 2,000 people turn up in Warrior Square on a Saturday morning. And we've been doing this campaign all over the country. We've been over in the southwest, we've been in Bristol, we've been in the Midlands, we're around this region these few days, and next week we're in Scotland and then we're in the East Midlands. We're covering every single part of the country and what we're doing. Shadow Cabinet are doing exactly the same. We have two big tasks to develop at the moment. One is the details and the policies we want to take forward and the empowerment of people within our society. And secondly is to make sure as a party we're there, ready and campaigning all the time in support of people that are up against it because of the poverty they face, brought about by an economic choice and a political choice, and that we're ready for an election whenever it comes. But elections, as you all know, are not won in the 3, 4 or 5 weeks of the intensity of the election campaign. They're won by what we do all the year round, why we're there supporting people. When Cat Smith was elected MP for Lancaster, she'd worked very hard to win that first election and got a victory, defeated a sitting Tory MP, and it was a Labour gain. Fantastic result. Cat got stuck in straight away as the local MP, and I've never forgotten the way in which she responded to the people of that town when the flood took place. She was out there with her boots on, helping people in a practical way, in the middle of the night, supporting them. Because that's what Labour does. That's what we are. We are the community. We are the party of the community, and that is the strength of the community. So, I'm now getting glared at by people that I dearly love and spend a great deal of my life and time with. And they spend an awful lot of time every time I'm speaking, not looking at me, not even listening at me, looking at their watches. It's very sad. But what they are telling me is that we're going to have to finish the moment because I've got to go to Blackpool, and then tonight we've got a big rally on Southport Beach. So if you've got nothing to do and you've checked the timetables absolutely correctly, come along to Southport Beach later on today. We're going to have a great event there, and Steve Rotheram, our wonderful Mayor of Merseyside City Region, is going to compare the event because as a party we campaigned in the election. What was powerful about it was bringing people together. That spirit of doing things together. When you're doing things together, you feel stronger, you feel bolder, you feel more empowered, and that infects those people that then come along and support us. Our membership is growing, 575,000 and still rising. I'm very proud of that, very proud of the number of people that are coming to our conference, proud of what we've achieved, but absolutely determined. We take the fight to the Tories, we challenge them. Are we to be a country of ever richer minority of people and an ever impoverished number at the other end and deep insecurity in between? Or are we to be a country that does care for all, that does ensure we have a serious, sensible, tariff-free trade relationship with Europe in future, a country that is determined to conquer inequality and poverty and unleash the spirit and potential that's there in everybody, and a society that cares, or a society that walks by on the other side? We know where we've come from as a party, we know why we exist as a party, we know what we've achieved as a party, and we know what we can achieve in the future. Thank you very much, and all the best for winning in Morecambe.